when you look at where the spending is, 76% of the spending going to the mandatory programs, don't you have to really cut into those mandatory programs in order to really make a dent? You say you're going to balance the budget.
Yeah,
you can't balance the budget just by DOGE cuts,
We're
right?
going to have growth like you've never seen before.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you said that.
We're going to have growth. I'm not going to touch Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Now, we're going to get fraud out of there. We have people 250 years old and all, tremendous fraud, but we're going to have tremendous growth. When you look at all of the car companies that are now coming into the United States, and they've been announcing, like on a daily basis, they're going to build their plants and they're going to create tremendous numbers of jobs and so many other things.
President Trump telling me about his plans to balance the budget during my exclusive interview on Sunday Morning Futures. The president is now urging Republicans to pass a stopgap spending bill in their planned vote tomorrow to keep the government funded at current spending levels through September. Joining me now is the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget President, Maya MacGuineas. Maya, it's great to have you this morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Morning, Maria.
Well, you've done extensive work on the debt and on the spending, and I want to get to that. But first, let me get your near-term expectations for this stopgap spending bill and avoiding a government shutdown. Here we are at the edge of a cliff once again, Maya. So what's your take on the near-term issues? And then let's go broader into the reconciliation package and your reaction to President Trump with me on Sunday.
Okay, perfect. Well, in the near term, here we are, almost halfway through the year, talking about what the budget should be and whether they're going to get there without shutting the government down. It is preposterous. Our budget process is so entirely broken. For the federal government, the budget is supposed to be passed early before you do anything else, and we basically pass the budget as a stopgap measure these days just to avoid, not doing the basic workings of government. But fiscal year started October 1st. Here we are mid-March. I don't know if we're going to shut down. I don't think we will. I think they will just extend the current levels of spending. But what we should be doing is actually using the budget as a planning process, as a strategic laying out of what the priorities are, and then fitting in things like the government spending and tax cuts that are consistent with the budget. We've lost sight of how to do that, and we really need to overhaul the entire process. So there should be no talk of shutdowns.
And Knowing that we spend too much overall, this is one of the issues that the Freedom Caucus keeps, raising its hand about. The fact that they don't want to be at the end of the cliff every time. And so we have a spending problem. And so let's talk about that spending problem. President Trump has a very good goal. I mean, he wants to balance the budget. The DOGE cuts are very important. Of course, the DOGE cuts are not going to get us to a balanced budget. What will, Maya?
Yeah, absolutely. His goal is very important to balance the budget. It's going to take a while to get there because we are so deep in the fiscal hole. Another important goal, I think, is the one that Secretary Bessent has put out, which is to get the deficit at least down to 3% of GDP. But balancing the budget itself is going to take about $17 trillion in savings. That's an astronomically large number, much larger than we're going to see from DOGE or anything else. Getting to the 3% goal is about half that, maybe $7.5 trillion in savings. Still aggressive, but we could get there. But to the main point, and one that you just made so well, you cannot get there through saving millions from contracts in DOGE. I think DOGE has an incredible potential to make the government more efficient, root out waste and fraud. But the biggest growth in our federal government comes from retirement, healthcare, and interest payments, the single fastest growing part of the budget. We cannot pretend that we don't have to look at the big areas of the budget, the healthcare delivery system, defense procurement system. There's so much to be looking at there for savings. I hope both DOGE and our lawmakers will focus their attention on where the real trillions in dollars of savings are to start moving to that goal.
Yeah, and therein lies the fight, right? Lawmakers are eager to turn their focus to the Trump agenda, the reconciliation bill to pay for it. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office finds that the bill would need to reduce Medicaid spending in order to reach its goal. Now, Maya, you have a wonderful memo here out where you detail everything, and you write net interest cost of $881 billion in fiscal year 2024 is 3.1% of GDP. That's interest. Interest is the single largest item in the budget behind Social Security, more than spending on defense, Medicare, and children. And you write, it's truly unfathomable that when confronted with multi-trillion-dollar deficits and debt climbing toward record highs, lawmakers' response is to pass a budget allowing themselves to add trillions more in debt over the next decade. Now, Maya, one thing that President Trump keeps saying in reaction to this is that we're going to have growth. He's expecting growth to be triggered as a result of his other policies, deregulation, tapping into the energy capacity of America. Where do you put growth in all of this, Maya, in terms of cutting into debt?
Yeah, so if you look at the plan that they're looking to do in terms of the budget, where we would be cutting taxes, growing some spending and cutting other spending, that is likely to add, after growth, more than $2 trillion to our borrowing. So could we have higher growth? Absolutely. There are a lot of things that will lead to higher growth. Unfortunately, there are a lot of headwinds against additional growth as well. Some things that nobody can control, the aging of society, but also the immigration policies, the tariff policies, those could have less growth. The biggest thing I'm concerned about in terms of anti-growth is all of our borrowing. The more we borrow, the less growth we have. The problem is that every time we've promised to grow our way out of the problem, it has failed to do so. We're going to have to realistically look at our budget and look at our spending. We are spending $86 trillion over the next decade. The budget resolution that they're talking about, the reconciliation, would save $2 trillion. $2 trillion out of $86 trillion. If we want to deal with our fiscal problems, we're going to have to do more in terms of savings than that. That's where the real discussion has to be. Growth is great. One of the best ways we get there is really shutting the deficit. And so far, the policies would actually make the deficit worse.
Yeah, and we just talked about the SALT cap, and they want to weaken that. You've got New York and California lawmakers that say, look, I'm not signing on to the tax cuts unless I have my SALT deduction lifted. It sounds to me like they're looking to either double it. You just heard my last guest, the lawmaker, saying we're going to eliminate the marriage penalty. Give us your sense on the SALT cap and how that plays into all of this.
Well, SALT's so interesting because you're right. There are a lot of lawmakers who will not vote for this unless they get some relief there.
That's right.
But SALT is a regional issue. It depends on what state you're in. States where they are not hit by those high taxes don't really want to subsidize the states where they are. So in my mind, the SALT cap is an incredibly expensive policy to weaken, and it actually makes more sense that the state should make these own policies on their own. The bigger picture is everybody wants more tax cuts. Nobody, with some exceptions, is really willing to talk about the spending cuts. If you want to cut taxes and you don't want to explode the deficit, you're going to need to reduce spending. And lawmakers like to talk about the fun things, tax cuts and spending increases. Given our really daunting fiscal situation, we need to talk about the more difficult things of how to control our borrowing, how to control our spending, and not cut taxes unless we're willing to make those budgetary choices.
Well, you find me a politician that's going to go on the campaign trail and tell you, I'm cutting your Social Security, I'm cutting your Medicare, and I'm cutting your Medicaid.
I know, except that on Social Security or Medicare, if we don't do anything, there will be cuts. The truth is, from the outsiders who at least can say it, because I know it's not a winner politically, but we have to start talking honestly about Social Security. If we do nothing, there will be across-the-board benefit cuts of over 20% for current retirees. That is in less than a decade that those trust funds will become insolvent. We have to make those changes, and we need our lawmakers to start telling the truth. We should really put in place a Social Security Commission that will figure out how to fix the program. You can protect retirees, but we need to make sure there aren't those automatic benefit cuts. And if we don't have that discussion, we're really going to see some pain in a short amount of time in Social Security and Medicare as well.
All right, Maya, you are a geek. I always say that about you. You are a geek when it comes to numbers, and I love that about you. Happy Women's History Month, Maya MacGuineas. Good to talk with you this morning.